Alright, so we're gonna have another talk today. Hopefully this one turns out a little shorter. And this was because A, it's something I should have talked about in the herbicide video that I didn't because I forgot, and B, it came up in discussion in the comments, which that video got a shit ton of comments, a lot more than I was expecting. That video went a lot better than I was expecting. As of right now, it's only got 5 thumbs down, which I was expecting a lot more out of that. So everybody was adults. I was impressed. But anyway, cover crops. That is another one of them things. Kind of goes hand in it goes hand in hand with moldboard plowing. And it also kind of shows how agriculture has changed in like the last 70 years. You look back like in the 40s, 50s, 60s, up into the 70s, even up into the early 80s, because the 80s is where agriculture really changed after the farming crisis, and you started to see a lot more consolidated farms, and you started to see a lot more specialized farms. Prior to the farming crisis, you had a lot more small farms, and those farms were diversified. You didn't see this guy farmed row crops, this guy had livestock. You had row crop ground, and you either had dairy, or you had some beef, or you had some hogs, or a combination of all of that. But everybody had livestock, everybody had row crops, everybody had hay ground, everybody had pasture ground. It was all on, there was no specialized farming like what we have today, where like I farm corn, soybeans, and wheat. I don't have any livestock. Or you have giant dairy operations that have no row crop ground other than what they chop for silage. Or giant feedlots that all they have is beef cows, and they have hay ground to feed the cows. There was operations like that mostly out west, but like in the Midwest and the South, there was none of that. Everything was a diversified farming operation. Well, back then, cover cropping wasn't really a thing because you had such a robust crop rotation program. Because like today, you think of somebody that has hay that markets it like horse people, or small, like people that have like 1 or 2 cows that they raise for freezer beef or whatever. Like my next door neighbor, pretty much, he has row crops now, but when I was growing up, all he had was hay. That was, I think at that point, he had like 150 acres of hay. That was all he had, was hay. And, you got fields into orchard grass and alfalfa for 6, 7, 8 years until it just gets to the point where the stand is so old that it can't produce anymore. That was never a thing back then. You had fields that were going to be into hay for 2 or 3 years. Once it became so proud, it takes a year for a hay field to become productive, and then they'd have it into hay for 2 or 3 years after that, and then they'd plow that hay down, and that would be row crop, and they would move that hay to a different field. And then they had, if they had livestock, chances are they also had some ground that was growing oats or barley or some sort of small grain for feed. And then they would be baling the straw off of that for bedding. And then if they were growing corn, not only were they growing corn for market, but they were probably chopping some for silage and grinding some for feed. Soybeans didn't really become a major commercial crop until the 60s. Prior to that, soybeans were actually grown for silage. They never grew them, they never combined them, they chopped them, which I can't believe that went over very well, because I've seen what soybeans will do to a cow, and it's I guess it makes a good feed, but the stuff that comes out the back end is it's nasty. But so like back then, you didn't have to cover crop because your cropping rotation was changing so much and so frequently, and you were growing such a wide array of crops to take care of your farming operation, because you needed hay, you needed small grains, you needed corn, you needed everything to take care of that farm. Whereas now, you're growing corn and beans. And we call that today a crop rotation, but it's really not a crop rotation. Switching corn and beans every year, that's not a good crop rotation. You're not having it rotated out of a certain crop long enough to take care of any weed problems or disease problems or insect problems that might have arose from having a crop on that ground, because 1 year later you're gonna have the same crop on it again, whereas back then you might be 2 or 3 years before you see corn on ground again, or 2, 3, 4, 5 years before you see, you get the idea. So now, in the way we are now, we have cover cropping to try to bring some of that artificially back into rotation. We're throwing a green crop out on some ground to try to introduce a new field cover into the rotation to throw the system out of balance a little bit, to try to reduce weed pressure, disease pressure, anything that might be there. Which I am actually, despite the fact that I don't do it, I think cover cropping is a very good thing. I like the principle behind it. The problem is it doesn't work worth a shit in our climate. Nobody does it around here, with the exception of there are some guys up north of town that farm some pretty hilly ground, and they'll go in and they'll work everything, and then they'll go in at a 90-degree angle to the hillsides, and they'll sow in like some orchard grass or some rye or something to hold that ground in place over winter, and then in the spring when they run their finisher over it, they just work it in. But that's about the only place around here, or only people around here that you'll see cover cropping. And there's also one organic farm I could think of that cover crops, but they do a really, 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 really piss poor job of it. And you go drive by their fields in the summer during the growing season, and because they're organic, they won't spray anything, and they're into that roller crimper fad that I don't understand, and it doesn't kill the shit. And you drive past their fields, and it looks like hell. So that's the biggest reason I don't cover crop. That being said, there's some stuff I'd like to try. But it's one of them deals where I have to get a situation created, and I have to have the time to do it. What I'd like to do on the wheat ground I have this year, and we'll see if time and money allows, because I want to price out how much it's going to cost to do it, but like 2 or so weeks before that wheat's ready to cut, I'd like to go over top of it and broadcast on like a clover, so that by the time I go to cut the wheat, hopefully the crop is established, it's starting to come up. That way, by the time fall rolls around and I'm ready to work it down, I have a nice green stand established, and I could use that for a good fall plow down and what they call a green manure. So basically that clover will be there sequestering nitrogen from July until it'll probably stop around mid to late September, when it gets too cold and it starts to go dormant. So I like to cover crop in that sense on the wheat ground. Like I say, we'll see what happens. It's one of them deals where I got to have time to do it, and the situation's got to allow for it. The other thing that I would like to try, because of the way our climate is around here, our biggest enemy in the spring is getting ground to dry out and warm up as fast as possible, and that's really hard to do if you have a thick crop mat, which is why most guys around here fall plow, if at all possible, because you break up that soil structure and get some air pockets down in there and fluff the soil up, and that allows water to percolate quicker, and because the ground is lighter and fluffier, it warms up faster, which also goes hand in hand with getting the water out, because the less water's in the ground, the faster it's going to warm up. That's really hard to do with the cover crop, because you have that thick crop mat. The sun can't physically get to the soil to dry it out and warm it up. So that's the biggest reason that nobody does it around here, at least in the sense that we're going to plant a cover crop in early fall after we get crop off, get it established, and then we'll burn it down or work it in the spring. You see that further south where the climate's a little warmer, it ain't going to work up here. But what I want to do, kind of in the same sense as what I want to do with the wheat, I think it'd be a cool experiment to try on a patch of corn ground, is go in, like, when the corn gets about 2.5 foot tall, basically just tall enough that you can still get over it with a tractor. And I'd like to broadcast a clover or something into it, something that's going to be a legume, and see what that does to reduce weed pressure, and see if that bumps the yield a little bit, because you are going to have that legume producing nitrogen, which the corn can turn around and use. So I think it'd be a cool experiment to try, but it's one of them deals where if I'm going to do it, I have to do it on a chunk of ground that I can't spray anything, because at that point you're going to have the corn sprayed once already, because it's going to be tall enough. So on that particular patch of ground, I would have to make sure that I do not have anything that's going to have a residual effect, because that'll start smoking that clover as soon as whatever I decide to plant is going to start smoking it as soon as it comes up. It has to be a field where there's not much weed pressure to begin with. Like, I've inherited a couple fields in the past 2 years that have really, like, I have one that's got really bad resistant ragweed in it, and then I have 2 of them that have really bad mare's tail in them that I'm trying to get under control. That's not the fields that you're going to want to try this experiment on, because until you get the weeds under control to where they're already manageable. So again, it's one of them deals where I have to have time, and the weather has to, like, if we're in a dry spell at that point, ain't no sense in trying it, because you can broadcast it, but it ain't coming up if there's not going to get any moisture. The other option I got is, if I set the cultivator real shallow, I could go in and broadcast it and buff it in with a cultivator to cover it up, and that would help the germination a little bit. But it's something that I thought about playing with. It's something I'd like to try. It's just one of them deals, you gotta have the time to do it. But that being said, and technically that would be called intercropping, not cover cropping, although it's the same principle. You're using a cover crop to reduce weed pressure and create a green manure, and in that case you're also using a legume to produce nitrogen for the actual crop, in this case corn, that you're actually trying to produce. And at that point the clover just becomes a plow down once the corn is off, which is a double whammy. You get some organic matter out of it when you plow it down, and you've already got you have that nitrogen production for the corn, so it's a win-win situation, at least in my mind. Whether or not it's going to work, I don't know. That's why it's an experiment. But that's kind of my thoughts on cover crops. Like I say, I like it. It's a good principle. It just a matter of, like everything else, it's got a time and a place where it's going to work. And in the traditional sense of cover cropping over winter, like you see further south, it doesn't work here, like I told you. Now that being said, we'll tie this back into the herbicide. Quick story: when I was trying to remember what class I had, or class I was in when we took it. I want to say it was my soil and water conservation class when I was down at Purdue. We took a field trip to a farm just south of Lafayette down there, and one of the professors at school there was basically all she worked with was cover crops. That was her thing. That was cover cropping was her thing. And she was set up with this farmer down there who had been working with her for, at that point, like 7 or 8 years, I think. He farmed 5,000 acres, didn't work any of it. All 5,000 acres was cover cropped. He ran that whole farm with 2 John Deere, what are they? I don't even think they were 300 horse. They were like the mid-range 8RTs, like 8R295 or 8R, just, I don't know. I'm not a Deere guy, so I don't know the tractors. But they were just shy of 300 horse John Deere 2 tracks with 2 air seeders, 2 corn planters, a sprayer, and 2 Lexion combines. The only tillage tool he had was he had a McFarland. Oh, I can't remember what McFarland's VT tool is. It's basically their version of a turbo till, but they use individual shanks for each coulter. But that was the only tillage tool he had, and he said the only time he used that was if he had to go buff down some ruts from the combines. That was the only time that tillage tool ran. Other than that, he cover cropped, and it was the weirdest, ugliest combination of cover crop you ever see in your life. It was tillage radish, sorghum Sudan grass, cover crop sunflower, which isn't like sunflower you think of as far as like you see on the Dakotas in actual crop production. They only get a head on them about yay big around, and they only get about, I don't know, 2 foot tall, maybe. I'm trying to think of what else was in there. I think there might have been some orchard grass. I think there was some cereal rye. There were 7 different things that there was in this conglomeration of shit that they used for cover cropping, and it looked like hell. I mean, it looked nasty. And when we went on this field trip, we were talking to him in the shop, and during our question and answer time, and one of the questions that came up was, because he didn't work any of it in, he used a burn down. It's like, what are you using for burn down? He says Roundup. That's it? Yeah, Roundup. Not tank mixing any multiple modes of action, anything. Nope, just Roundup. We haven't had any issues with killing it with Roundup. 5,000 acres of cover crop. Burn off with Roundup every year. That's how you create resistance. And rye is hard to kill to begin with. Rye is not fun to kill with herbicide. Well, it's not fun to kill with like Roundup or Liberty. You can definitely kill it with a herbicide, but as far as like the standard herbicides everybody thinks of, it's hard to kill. So that just blew our mind that you've been doing this for this long, invest all this money, and all you're killing your cover crop with is straight Roundup. So it's the same thing. There's a right way and a wrong way, and in my mind, that was the wrong way. But that's just me. When I think of cover crop, I think of plow down, whether it be chisel plowing it in, disking it in, although I hate disking. I think mullboarding in a cover crop is one of the best things you can do. That's what I want to do. But yeah, that's basically where I'm at on it. And cover cropping serves multiple functions. You got soil retention, you have nutrient uptake, and banking. Basically what the principle is the plants take up the nutrients that are in the soil, hold it, and then when you burn that crop down or work it back in, those nutrients go right back into the soil, with the added bonus of organic matter from all the biomass that you just put back on the soil. and it's supposed to improve soil tilth because, and this is where it comes in on the no-till system, you create this really, really thick root mat that, depending on the type of plant that you, or depending on the type of crop that you're using for your cover and what kind of root system it has, you can on a cover crop have a root system that goes down 4, 5, 6 feet, and that creates channels for water to go down through the ground. But again, you start getting this far north, you need to get rid of that crop mat, so you gotta work it. So cover crop and no-till ain't gonna work up here. There's spots up here where no-till works pretty good. You throw a cover crop in, you just shot your system, because you're never gonna get that ground to dry and warm up in the spring. It just ain't gonna happen. We have a real narrow window of opportunity in the spring with the way our climate is to get shit done, and throwing a cover crop into it as ground cover in the spring, no go. That being said, like I want to try, I think there's opportunity to fall cover crop. I guess it'd be midsummer cover crop, get your stand established, and then plow it down in the fall. And I think it might work, but it's one of them deals, at least up here, I've never seen anybody do it. I think it's worth a shot. I don't think anybody does it up here just because, or has tried it up here just because nobody's really set up for cover cropping, because it doesn't really work that great up here in the conventional sense of cover cropping. So, yeah. I guess that's just a little bit of rambling. I don't know if, like I say, I don't know. Again, I don't know if that made a whole lot of sense. I don't know how smart any of it was, but that's just my thoughts on it. And yeah. So I guess that's enough talking for another video. Later this week, well, I got tires on order for the field cultivator. I got new sweeps over here. I got to get some nuts for my bolts. Yeah, it's going to be kind of a slow week in general, because I'm just trying to get parts gathered around for this weekend's project, which is going to be bring my Oliver field cultivator down and get all the shovels put on it. There's some stuff I want to get fixed on it, so I probably got like a day and a half worth of work. But anyway, that's what you got to look forward to upcoming. But like I say, I wanted to make this video because cover cropping and moldboard plowing, they kind of go together, because as far like they just kind of go like this together. I think that they work really good. And you see a lot of, well, like if you watch Farmhand Mike, about a month or so ago, we had that 4-wheel drive case pulling that 10, I think it was a 10 bottom plow, a big organic farm down in, it was either central Indiana or central Ohio. Lay down a cover crop, moldboard it in the fall. That's a perfect system, right? Well, no system is perfect. No system is 100% right. But in my mind, you got something going if you can manage that. But anyway, so yeah, I guess that's enough for this one, and we will catch you guys on the next one. Sorry for all the rambling. I'm bad at that.